Le document que nous allons vous présenter est le premier d'une série de films de témoignages et de réflexions sur la conduite stratégique des situations de crise. Ce film pilote a été réalisé à partir d'un entretien avec notre collègue Joseph Scanlon de l'université Carleton à Ottawa. Comme bon nombre de responsables de crise, Joseph Scanlon a eu un parcours professionnel non linéaire. Tout d'abord journaliste, correspondant du Toronto Star à Washington, ensuite directeur de cabinet d'un ministre fédéral canadien chargé des affaires sociales. Il est aujourd'hui tout à la fois professeur à l'école de journalisme d'Ottawa, ensuite directeur d'un centre de recherche sur la communication en situation de crise, et également professeur au Collège canadien de la police. Son message tient en deux mots. Tout d'abord, toute crise est aussi une crise d'information. Ensuite, qui n'est pas capable de gérer cette crise d'information ne sera pas en mesure de traiter la crise, même dans ses aspects directement opérationnels. Mais pour faire face à cela, il faut être capable de traiter les nombreuses difficultés qui immédiatement surgissent en situation de crise, ce que Joseph Scanlon nomme la convergence.
Convergence occurs when everybody starts telling everybody else what's happening. The simple idea about what it means is that I pick up the phone and I call the police. Somebody else picks up the phone and they call the fire. Someone else calls the hospital. Someone else calls their cousin. Someone else calls their mother. Someone else calls to find out what's happening. Someone else calls the media. The total effect of all of that calling at the same time can knock out a telephone system, because no telephone system is designed to handle that kind of peak load all at once. In a major crisis, it's just as likely as it is in a disaster that people will use communication systems such as the telephone to the point that they overload. But crises have another problem associated with them, which is very significant, and which also fits, by the way, something that happens in disaster. First of all, in crises, a lot of people get involved, and some of those people aren't normally involved. If we take a private company, for example, that's carrying on some form of manufacturing, it's true that it has to deal with some government regulations, with some outside connections. Then in a crisis, it will discover that all sorts of new organizations that have certain regulations to enforce take an interest in what's happening. So there's a sudden demand from outside by various forms of regulatory organization. The second form of demand that takes place is the media, because a crisis tends to become known and the media start to make demands, and those demands for information create their own sets of pressures.
Et sans oublier non plus les pressions venues d'en haut.
The chief executive officer, the board, the top managers want to know what's happening. All of them may well demand to know what's going on. And that means that the poor old line officer, the person actually handling the problem, is suddenly beset by all sorts of inquiries from the top. Now, the normal operating person usually has delegated power. He does what he's supposed to do. He has certain functions. He performs them without interference. He reports on a regular basis to someone up the line, and then it goes through channels step by step up the line. In a crisis, those channels are cut, and the chief executive officer suddenly calls this poor man who's never met him before and says, I want to know right now exactly what's happening.
Déferlement, avalanche, convergence. Mais le problème est que ceux qui ont à faire face n'ont pas seulement à traiter l'incertitude, mais bel et bien l'inconnu.
In a crisis, we don't know what's happening. Let's take one simple example like Tylenol. What happened was that some person or persons, some criminals, decided to put poison in some capsules of this product in one community. I know that now, and you know that now, and the company knows that now, and the police know that now. But when that crisis started, all we know is that some person has died from taking a capsule that contains poison. In the initial stages, there is no way that the company knows that it's one criminal on the loose in one city, perhaps even one store. For all they know at the start, their product has been contaminated. At the top, they don't know precisely what's happened. Yet as soon as the first word gets out, they're beset by questions from the police, from regulatory agencies, and above all the media saying, what went wrong? What happened? Are you responsible? What's the situation? So I argue that the most critical stage of managing a crisis and the most critical problem arises when the crisis begins and you don't know what's happening. and you have to set in motion plans to find out, which may take a fair amount of time, and while you're finding out, you're pressed with all these demands for information, especially from the media.
La difficulté va donc être de se saisir de cette dynamique fuyante, en d'autres termes, d'embrayer sur l'événement, et sans subir, ce qui est souvent le cas, une disqualification immédiate.
It's extremely difficult at that point. There's an enormous temptation to try to answer, to make up answers, or to state that it couldn't possibly be your problem.
D'où la question des responsables. Que faire? Que dire?
Well, the evidence we have is the only thing you can do is to say two things. One, we don't know. We can't possibly know at this point, but we are finding out. And when we find out, we will share with you what we learn. Obviously, something has gone wrong. There's been a disaster, there's been a crisis. We don't know why, and you can't expect us to know, but we will find out. Secondly, if you have plans, this is when plans become so important, because if you have systematic plans for dealing with crises, and part of those systematic plans include effective ways of checking and finding out, then you can tell your inquirers, we are finding out, and here is precisely what we are doing to do that. So in the early stages of response, your only effective answer to questions is, we do have a plan. The plan is being used. That plan will allow us to find out, and when we do find out, we will share. I have very strong beliefs that one should tell the truth. And the reason is quite simple. If you don't tell the truth, you will get caught. If you get caught, you will destroy your credibility. If your credibility is gone, it doesn't matter what you say, no one will believe you. The experience we have in crisis management is that someone, somewhere, will leak information. And if you have lied, you will be caught. So it's in your interest, in my opinion, to tell the truth. Now, it doesn't mean you have to say everything. It means you mustn't lie. What happens if there's something you don't want to say? Then in my opinion, you don't say it, but what you do is explain the reasons why. Let's suppose you're a company with a manufacturing process that involves trade secrets. You simply say, that's a trade secret. We're not prepared to share that. That's important to us commercially, and we simply aren't prepared to tell the details. That's your answer. Supposing a matter is under investigation, there's an inquiry. You can say, the matter is under investigation, there's an inquiry, and we do not want to comment for fear we will damage that. Supposing it affects individuals, you can say, yes, there was a mistake involved, but we're not prepared to point out individuals because we think our employees are entitled to their privacy, and that is one of our positions. However, we will tell you what happened. We know, and we've done a lot of work in this area, that there are occasions when certain kinds of things, if reported, will cause a reaction, because we know that hostage takers and the hostages constantly listen to radio, watch TV. Now, our policy, which we teach for Canadian police community, is that you should tell the media why you are worried, tell them what sort of things worry you, ask them to cooperate, but not lie to them. Now, some of the time, what you say to them is, we don't care what you report after the fact, when it's over, tomorrow, the day after. All we're worried about in these cases is what you say right now. So you try to persuade them, if possible, to delay. I have no illusion about controlling the media. I believe in trying to persuade. It seems to me the most effective way of achieving a form of control is by making clear why you have a concern. So what I suggest is, rather than saying, don't do this, you mustn't do that, this would be terrible, I'm not going to tell you, what I say is, these are the reasons why I believe, based on experience, that if you do this, it could cause the following problem. We find that if we do that, we normally get cooperation. Now, some people say, well, our media in our country are different. All I can tell you is that in Canada, When we've been open with the media about a problem, we've always got cooperation. When New Scotland Yard tried it in the United Kingdom during an incident and told the media they wanted cooperation, they got cooperation. When the German government during the Hans Martin Schleyer kidnapping went to the German media, said we want cooperation, they got cooperation. So where it's been tried, it's worked. Where it hasn't been tried, obviously it hasn't worked, but it hasn't been tried. I'm convinced that openness is important, that there are reasons at times why you're not open, but it's best to spell those out to the media, to be specific, and rely on your ability to persuade them that what you're doing makes sense. I know that on occasion, some people believe that the technique has been used of what we might call misdirection. There are two problems. You talk about one to hide the second. In my opinion, inevitably, the truth will come out, and when it comes out, you will have damaged your credibility. Furthermore, in my opinion, the best way to prolong a crisis is to tell part of the story and then have another part of the story come out later, and that simply creates the impression that there's still more. You're never going to be believed after that. You're going to have lost credibility. In my view, the best way to get rid of a crisis is to tell all of it, if you know, as fast as possible, so the story comes and goes as quickly as possible. Because I think one technique of getting rid of crises is to unload everything very quickly so that it's over and it's done and you've been open and upfront and honest. I just don't see the point of attempting to mislead by focusing on one aspect or in another, hoping something will disappear. In my opinion, failure to disclose part of what's happening as a tactic is a mistake, because to give out a little bit of information in the hope that the rest of it will go away, in my opinion, is a false belief. It will not happen. You'll eventually get caught. You'll be discovered to have been a liar. You will lose your credibility. You have damaged yourself forever, because you'll always be known as someone whom the last time was not forthcoming. I have a good story, and it's a friend of mine in the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. And for some years on the west coast of Canada, the police were not particularly open about problems. And he decided that I was right, he should be open. And it was a funny incident. It involved a ship, a small boat actually, carrying drugs. And they had got wind that this boat was trying to come into the Canadian coast. And they had followed the boat. And they had actually used radar. And at one point the boat went behind an island, and they lost it on the radar, and then they found it, and the drugs were all gone. So he told the media, we lost it, and then we found it, and the drugs were gone. We missed it. And he told them the whole story. And a reporter said, why are you telling us this time? What are you concealing this time? You've never been this open before. How come you're doing it this time? So he phoned me and said, what do I do? I said, the problem is, after many years of not being open, it's going to take you a while to convince the media that now you are being open. But after a while, they will see that happen. Trust is not something that comes naturally. It must be earned. And it's something that can be very badly damaged by short-term stupidity in attempts to conceal part of a problem or lie about something or focus on something, whatever. So in my view, the important point about telling the truth is that it builds credibility and gives you a terrific edge in relationships. If you're talking about media relations and dealing with the outside agencies, including media, if you are the most efficient collector, the most efficient at getting information, and therefore the most knowledgeable, you become the key source. And the way you achieve dominance and take control of an incident as seen by the media is to become the most important, best informed source. If you are the most important, best informed source, they will have to come to you. If they come to you, your point of view will prevail. When the Arrow airplane crashed at Gander, Newfoundland, and 248 U.S. soldiers were killed, they came from a base called Fort Campbell, Kentucky. Now, obviously, in the early stages, the base doesn't know very much. but the families are there. They're waiting for their relatives to arrive because the plane was one step away from Fort Campbell when it crashed. The media were allowed on base into one location. The senior information officer said, "Here's all I know right now." Then he left them and went out to try to find out some more. Then he came back and briefed his staff, and he said to the media, "Here's what I know now. Has anybody just arrived? Let me tell you the few things I knew earlier." Then he went to collect, then brief his staff, then bring the media up to date, and brief them again. And he told them, "If anything you want, you tell me, I'll do my best." They said, "We want to talk to relatives." He said, "Well, I'm prepared to do that only if the relatives say okay." He went to some relatives. He said, "The media want to talk to you." They said, okay. He came back, briefed his staff, told the media, "Yes, some relatives wish to talk to you. I will arrange that." And he did that systematically. So I have a very strong view that information is power, that access is a device for control, that media relations involves knowing enough so you become the dominant source and bringing them to that source so they want to be with you, because if they're not there, they're missing things that other people get. You know, there's some illusion that people have that the media live by this American word called scoop, which seems to mean an exclusive story nobody else has. Well, the reality is somewhat different. The media don't live for scoops. They live for not being scooped. And if a lot of things are happening at one place and you're not there and you're a reporter, your boss will say, "What have you been doing? Why weren't you there? How come everybody else has things you missed?" So if you become the dominant source, you become the focal point, you take over control. You can only do that with information. Therefore, collection is the key to effective media control, to effective media relations. All decision-making involves choices, so there's nothing different about a crisis in that expert A says we must do Y, and expert B says we must do X. And you have to make a choice. That's your function as an administrator. And you have to make a choice without having the technical expertise of expert A or expert B. That's the reality of all decision-making. Now, the only thing that gets different in a crisis is that it's pressed upon you that there's a time frame which is very short. Expert A says we must do Y right now. Expert B says, no, we don't need to do X until 10 minutes from now, but the two are incompatible. So you get caught with time and pressure of conflicting advice. I don't have any solution. I think the only real solution is pre-planning to the point that you've established who has credibility over time, and you've learned to trust those people on the basis of experience. But during crises, there will always be occasions in which you will have to choose between conflicting alternatives, between people who claim expertise when you're not quite sure who has what. And the only way you can cope, in my view, is to build up a track record over time. It's not an easy solution. What about this sudden arrival, the person from outside who arrives and says, "I have the great solution"? Well, I would say that if you've never heard of him before, it's unlikely he has the great solution. You have to go with the people you've come to know and trust. And you have to, over time, build up a capacity to judge. And you're going to have to live with your decisions. I mean, there's always going to be somebody after the fact will say, "Isn't it true that so-and-so advised X? And isn't it clear that now X would have been better?" Well, your only answer is on the basis of the information we had at the time, on the basis of the experience we had at the time, we made the decision that we felt was the most effective given that. In retrospect, you can always say it might have been better if, but that isn't the way it was then. And I made the best judgment I could, and I live with that.